All right, our second focus question looks at what do we know about research on teacher education, teacher preparation, teacher training, teacher learning. What do we know? So we know that the research on teacher education is disjointed. We lack a common language. We lack a common agenda. We know, as I mentioned earlier, that the words, the terms we use are important, and that without precision and without common understanding, there's inevitable confusion and misunderstanding. Sometimes that's unintentional, and I think we have some cases where we can argue that sometimes that's deliberate to divide us. In 2002, Wilson, Floden, and Farini-Mundy embarked on a pretty significant project taking a look at the current body of teacher preparation research. They wanted to get a handle on these 5 key questions. What did we know about these areas, and how did that impact how we might move forward? So they asked questions about the content preparation of teachers, the pedagogical preparation, their clinical training. They looked at the policies and strategies to improve teacher preparation. They looked at high-quality alternative preparation. And unfortunately, what they found was that the research was inconclusive. I find that a little bit scary as the dean of a school of education, right? So what did they have to say about this? Why did they feel that it was inconclusive? What they believed was that the research that we have conducted to that date had been small scale and interpretivist research. So that is a little bit limiting. It's pretty insular. We're only talking to each other. There's a gap in our research between the claims that we make and the evidence that we use to support it. There's a dearth of impact measures. There's lack of attention to the kinds of evidence that researchers are using to support their arguments. And they pose the question as to whether this is all due to the quote-unquote soft social science nature of our work. And a lot of our critics will use that idea against us. They noted also that there's very little research on policies intended to improve the quality of pre-service education. That doesn't mean we don't have policies, because we do. We have a lot of policies, but we have very little research on those policies. So they wrote in 2002, "We worry that unless we, as teacher educators and researchers, produce sound, robust measures of impact, others, policymakers and critics, will produce other, less appropriate measures." So that was 2002. So here I want to bring in this idea of looking at the terms, looking at the names we use again when it comes to the research, when it comes to the policy, and when it comes to the practice. Accountability is a pretty hot topic right now, right? Accountability measures, the accountability movement. The accountability idea has really become the pervasive normalizing discourse for us right now. The term has really legitimized what is seen as a shift from education as a cultural and social good to education as an economic imperative, this idea of accountability. 15 years ago, you really couldn't find the word accountability in the research. This is a pretty new orientation. So we're going to kind of tease apart these 2 ideas as behind this idea of what's in a name. How do we name? How do we frame? What are the nuances associated with the way we conceptualize things? So currently, this, I hope you can see this, I'll walk you through it a little bit, this idea of mapping teacher preparation to the learning that happens for the teacher, and that teacher learning to the practice that that teacher engages in, and that teacher practice to the learning of students is currently kind of considered the holy grail of teacher education research. People talk about the missing links. So we're trying to then wrap back from student learning to the preparation, the education, the training that teachers had at the college level. So any one of these steps has a whole range of variables and contexts that I think are fascinating, right? What are all the variables? What are all the things you have to think about when you're thinking about what's the relationship between the preparation experience that a teacher candidate has and that teacher's learning? That step alone is phenomenally fascinating. And yet we're trying to take all of these steps so that we can wrap back around to make connections to the preparation from the student outcome, the student learning outcome. All right, so I promised you that I'd come clean on my own biases, my own assumptions, my own orientations. All right, so I was a classroom teacher for many, many years. I went back to Harvard University, got my master's, began to focus a lot on the idea of multicultural education, working with urban students, looking at teacher learning in urban areas. I then went back and got my PhD at Boston College under the direct support, mentoring, and supervision of Marilyn Cochran-Smith. I am very heavily influenced by her work. My orientation is grounded in that seminal work I engaged in with her. And I own that, and I'm willing to acknowledge that, and I think it's important that we all get to that point. So you will see her work embedded here, and my own work, which I'll share a little bit about, is also oriented. We're coming from the same place, is what I'm saying, all right? So just recently at ARA, how many of you are at ARA? All right, and so if you heard her spoke, she's been talking about this idea of accountability. She's talking about and I'm taking what she's talking about to help us look at what's going on in these words that we choose. So if you look in the dictionary and if you begin to talk to people about, in general, when you use the word accountability, what are you talking about? Well, we're usually talking about some form of blame. Accountability implies that there's an explanation required for some failure. Accountability also implies that you are to be answerable. So when we go back to those steps between the missing link, the holy grail of teacher education, if we are looking at accountability from what happens in teacher preparation to what happens with student outcomes, there's this idea that teacher preparation better be held accountable, better be answerable for those student learning outcomes. Accountability tends to be focused in areas that are hierarchical and tends to be focused in a bureaucratic structure. When you look up responsibility, when you ask people associations with responsibility, responsibility is generally considered to be something that's shared. Responsibility is considered to be something that's professional, and responsibility is considered to be something that is action-oriented. So, what do you think? How do the subtle differences in the terminology impact our research, our practice, our policy, like this idea between the difference between accountability versus responsibility? And here are a few of those other terms to sort of prompt you as you take another minute to turn to your neighbor and have a short conversation.